Thank you for having me. I'm going to do hopefully a fairly short talk on Django Core Demystified, and I will go into a bit more into it shortly. But for those who don't know, my name is Sarah Boyce. I am a Django Fellow. I've been a fellow for about 3 or 4 months, so not very long in that role. For those who don't know what a fellow is, the Django Software Foundation pays a couple of contractors to help maintain the framework. And that is basically what I do now. So I am very much looking after the pull requests and tickets and releases and all of the stuff that is around making Django better and bigger and secure and all these kind of things. So that is my job. And this talk was kind of motivated by the question of how is Django similar and how is it different to other open source libraries and packages, which is an interesting question in and of itself. And to be honest, I have quite limited experience of other open source libraries. So I'm going to talk mostly about Django and how I think it is different or similar. But I'm more interested in the discussion afterwards. I'm hoping we're going to get lots of questions and we can discuss all of this a bit better as a group. But just to throw some ideas out there, we can start with a little bit of theory. And so firstly, there is a book which I will highly recommend called Working in Public by Nadia Erbal, which categorizes open source projects into 4 groups. And these are toys, stadiums, clubs, and federations. And this is based on whether it has high or low user growth or high or low contributor growth. Now, I don't find this visually very easy to digest. So to me, this looks a little bit like this. The gray dots represent users and the green dots represent contributors. And essentially, if you have a toy, this is an open source project, which probably the person who authored it is the main person who is using it. Perhaps there are 1 or 2 other users, but the audience is really, really small. And then you will get ones where actually the audience is large. There are lots of users, but still there are not that many contributors or maintainers for that project. There might be reasons for that. Maybe the maintainer or author actually deliberately wants to keep this quite small, or perhaps it's perhaps this is something that Python users use, but maybe it's written in Rust. And so maybe there's a big barrier to entry from the people who actually use the project to like the skills that are required to contribute to it or maintain it. Another type are these clubs where the overlap between the contributors and the user base is really high. So it means the group is really invested in the project. In a way, it sounds great. So it must. I am not really sure about whose projects these are, but it means that you can get feedback on what you're doing with it, and people must be quite engaged. And I think the example was perhaps if the tool was for like a group in the physics community or something like this, where the people who use it are very invested in contributing to it, or something like that. And then there are federations, and there's a reason I came to that last. And that's where there are lots of contributors, but there are also lots of users. And in my opinion, Django is a federation. And the main reason this is kind of like also an extract from the book as to what a federation is. Federations are similar to companies or NGOs, and that Django is very similar to a company, I'm going to say many times. They are more complex to manage from a governance standpoint, and so they tend to develop processes. Django loves processes. There's voting, there's leadership positions, foundations, working groups, and technical councils that address coordination issues within the broader community. These contributors in turn make decisions for a broader constituency of passive users. If you are already quite familiar with how Django runs, a lot of these things exist in Django. So for example, we do have a foundation. We have the Django Software Foundation, and we do elect a board. So, you know, the community votes for people to take up leadership positions. We also have a technical council. We have the steering council. Again, this is an elected group of people. And if I go back, yeah, so this is to help make decisions for a broader constituency of passive users. So there are people who are very engaged in Django, and there are a lot of people who are very engaged. And then there are also a lot of users who are not engaged, and that's fine. But yeah, we have voting and mechanisms and processes to help manage this, basically. And as I mentioned, Django loves processes. This is probably, I'm only briefly going into some of the governance, and I will go into some of the processes that we have. But because Django is a bit like a big company and it has all of this structure and it has lots of processes, this is probably one of the things that people will notice being different to a different open source project. That doesn't quite have the quantity of users or the quantity of contributors there who are, interacting with it. All right, so we could talk about that later. I'm looking forward to discussions, but if we now move away from that and go a little bit into the practical stuff of Django, let's say you wanted to get a change into Django. So what are you going to notice about how Django is similar and how Django is different to other open source projects? The first thing you will probably notice is that Django does not use GitHub issues. I think GitHub issues has a very large market share of issue trackers, ticket trackers, whatever you want to call it, for open source projects. Django didn't start off in GitHub. It did migrate to GitHub. And the tracker it's been using since, I think, the start of Django is this tracker called Track. And it is definitely something that people need to get used to, as a lot of people already have some experience using GitHub issues, and I don't think there are that many open source projects that use Track. However, it does have a lot of fields in here that you can filter on and order by, and it is actually quite a powerful tool. But it is definitely something that people get quite overwhelmed with the first time that they come to the Django project and want to make a contribution. But okay, so Django has Track, it's an issue tracker. Django also has this thing that we call triage. So whenever someone creates a ticket in Track, the very first state is called unreviewed. And every ticket will be triaged. So this is going through whether it gets closed or accepted. They're basically the two things that will happen to a ticket quite immediately. This is one of the main roles of the fellows, but also of the review and triage team also helps out a lot with this. And actually anybody in the Django community can accept or close a ticket. You can't accept your own tickets. It has to be somebody else. But there are kind of justifications as to what this what should happen with this ticket. So if it's a duplicate, it's quite obvious. We need to find the duplicate, and you close it and you say, oh, it's being tracked by number 3000, blah, 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 blah. But we have decisions around whether if someone is trying to say they've got some issue, we need to be able to replicate it and confirm this is actually an issue in Django and it's not an issue in their code or in a third-party package or in Python itself or something, blah, 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 blah. So every ticket in track that is accepted went through some level of quality control, basically. But we could discuss that later. But as I said, Django has processes. It has lots of processes, very well-defined processes. Okay, so if you go and you have a ticket that's accepted, they are categorized into 3 categories. We have bugs, we have new features, and we have cleanup optimization tickets. So these are the 3 types of tickets that exist in Django track. I would say this is something that you could probably categorize most requests in any open source project. I'm not sure if they all have the same level of triage process, but that the core of the request is either it's like a bug fix or it's a new feature, or you're suggesting that something would be more readable or be a bit faster or something like this is probably quite common. Okay, but what's different? So with bug fixes, it has to have an accepted ticket. If you just created a pull request to Django without a ticket and said, oh, this fixes this problem that I had or something, it won't get reviewed and merged in without an accepted ticket, because we need to do the analysis to confirm and validate and all this kind of stuff around the bug fix itself. Another thing is that tests are a must. The bug fix needs to have something to make sure that we don't reintroduce this bug in future. It's not enough to just fix it. We have to have a test around it. And then the other thing which I think is interesting is you might have a test, you might have a fix, and we might still say no. Because I'm not sure what your experience is with Django, but I have not come across a bug in the wild using Django myself. I have only ever come across them through investigating really weird things with other people that, you know, and or through track itself, like when other people have reported it. It's not a buggy application, and a lot of these things that require a fix, it's not that we're so desperate for a fix, it needs to happen today and all this kind of stuff. If you have a fix, but it very much is a hack, then there will probably be more of a discussion of like, oh, but that doesn't feel like the right way to fix it. We should probably look into something. And I think that is perhaps different to certainly maybe how you are at work, maybe, or maybe other open source projects might be grateful enough that there is a fix. But for Django, it kind of has to be the right thing to do. And there's this kind of decision. So for me, I think that's quite maybe unique to something that's quite big. The other thing around Django is that we have a policy around release notes. Bug fixes actually don't usually have a release note. We usually don't talk about bug fixes at all. They just magically never existed, or they got fixed in the background and all this kind of stuff. And we will only write a release note for the monthly releases. So these are the 5.0.7s or something. And these are called like high severity bug fixes. But usually this is around something that was newly introduced in that version of Django that broke something existing. So that should have never happened. And so we try to fix these, and there will be a small release note to justify why people have to like upgrade to the newest monthly. But otherwise, we don't have release notes, and different open source projects have different policies on these. I do think release notes are super interesting because sometimes it feels a bit of a shame that not all of that work is captured. But this is how we do it. All right, next one is new features. New features, I have split into new features and then like something else. One of the things that I think is probably interesting here is Django, because the Django is like a big company, there is a lot more of a culture of cost and risk maintenance than there perhaps is with would be a smaller company kind of thing. We don't have like the excitement of, yeah, let's just try it, so why not, and all this kind of stuff. And it's not like it's a very small project where perhaps someone is so happy that someone is using their project and that they've suggested an improvement that they're like, yeah, that sounds great, let's do it, because they're quite flattered that it's being used. Django has kind of lost all of that rosy-eyed kind of thing when people ask for adding new stuff to Django. And therefore, the community has to want it. We don't want to add something in which only one person out of thousands of users is going to use and have to maintain it for forever. And that's why Django has some process around encouraging that the community tries to engage with each other and get agreement that we should include this. This is not just around new features to Django itself. This also extends to the docs, because the docs are just as important as the code. The Django docs get quoted, and they are quite they're a very important piece of the framework. So even suggesting a new topic in the docs, although that fundamentally sounds like a great idea, there is still maintainability and other forms of costs associated with that. And it needs to really make sense that this is something that we can include as being, that we know it's correct, that we know people can quote us without, that being dodgy, and that this is something that's not going to get out of date in, I don't know, a month's time and all this kind of stuff. So new stuff is hard. With new contributors, I really recommend that you do bug fixes, because accepted bug fixes are quite nicely defined, and you can probably get progress on that without having to discuss this with the wider community, and discussions are hard. So yeah, new stuff is hard. There's a different type of new stuff, and that is changing something existing. So again, the community has to want this change, and the upgrade path becomes quite important here. So Django does have a deprecation process. We want the developer experience of upgrading Django to be nice. And so if something needs to, like, if you can't deprecate it and you need to just subtly change it under the hood, there will be resistance to that. And there is generally resistance to change anyway, because we're like a big company, and change has cost associated to it. There's lots of risks associated to it. And so if you are suggesting something, you will probably encounter some resistance, and there needs to be a very strong argument as to why we need to do this, because it is certainly safer not to. But yes, interesting. Next one is the cleanup optimizations ones. Right, these are my least favorite group of things. This is when someone goes, I think this is more readable if it was like this, or I think this is, better. And it's quite subjective and fuzzy. And the other problem is it can introduce bugs quite easily. There is usually an assumption with these things that there is sufficient test coverage, and that if the test suite passes, there won't be a problem. But actually, that's not necessarily the case. Whereas there is a lot more discipline around the tests for new features and bug fixes than there is around cleanups and optimizations. So I have learned that these are actually quite dangerous. The other thing is, if you are suggesting that this is faster, really you need to try and prove it. So try and provide some benchmarks as to why this is actually faster. Django actually does have benchmarks. This is Django ASV. You can contribute to that repository and run some benchmarks to help prove it. And there is always a cost associated with even small changes, even small rewording of the docs to make that sentence ever so slightly clearer. There is a cost in terms of translations. The translation strings will update for everybody. Things like this. So there are changes where the value has to be there. It has to really be worth it. And so, yeah, these are another group of things that we are perhaps a bit more pessimistic in Django than perhaps in other open source libraries. I'm not sure. I don't know how people handle these kind of requests. Yeah, so if you want to learn more about the contributing to Django process, there is a really good talk, which even though it's in 2016, it hasn't changed much at all. It is still very relevant. And this is a talk by Tim Graham mostly. It's a Django Under the Hood talk, and he goes through what it means to be a fellow, goes through triaging and contributing to Django and reviewing tickets and all this kind of stuff. And it's got lots of information in there, and it's definitely in more depth than what I just kind of rattled on through. So I would recommend watching that if you want to learn more about specifically Django. All right, then my last topic, which is also I think quite important. I didn't have enough time to go into a great deal of detail here, but how is Django similar to other open source libraries? We deal with people. We're dealing with people. People are hard. people are hard. People are great, but people are hard. And I can make. Oh no. So one of the things that you might notice in Django is that some of the people who are involved are, in my opinion, they're like minor celebrities. So some of them have published books, or they have podcasts, or they've been keynote speakers, or they've like they invented the framework itself or something like this, and they might seem really intimidating, and they might be put on like a pedestal and have this kind of hero status, and it's quite difficult to treat them like a normal person. Believe me, they are normal people, and you will in time get used to each individual. I think it's worth mentioning that, because I know I found that quite intimidating when I started contributing. And now I'm just going to say there are lots of talks about people and open source, which are really, really good. And I recommend you listen to or watch that are going to do much better than what I'm going to say right now. So these four, so there's People, the API Users Guide by Ned Batchelor. This is a PyCon US keynote. And it's a really great talk about how to self-reflect on different interactions that you have with people online, and how to have better interactions, how to have better conversations with people. I think it's a great talk. There is also Know Your Limits on Surviving Open Source by Carlton Gibson. I think this is really nice from also a maintainer perspective, and someone giving advice as to how to go into open source with quite a healthy mindset. There is also Inside Out, My Journey of Understanding Inclusion by Natalia Bidat. This was a DjangoCon US talk, and this has got some really interesting stories and information about what you should bear in mind when you're dealing with different cultures and communicating between different cultures, and like biases that exist within all of us, and how to manage this better. And then this is one I've listened to recently. It's quite an old talk, actually, and this is The Hard Parts of Open Source by Ivan Chaplicki. And this is also a great talk, and he talks about how people can get angry and upset with each other, and some ideas as to how to not do that, basically. And he makes really good reflections on why we see this behavior, and what tools might we be able to develop in order to see less of it. So all of those are great talks. Much better than this one. But some tips. Yeah, so I think this is true of pretty much any open source project. Remember that you are interacting with a person, even though it can be hard to know this, because perhaps the name that you're looking at, it might not be their name. They may not have an image of themselves, and they may seem quite cold, but they will still be a person. And if you can try and build a relationship and build trust with the people you're interacting with, it will, I think it improves your experience and their experience, and you're going to get a better you're going to get more out of your experience of working with open source. And so I recommend that you humanize yourself when possible. If you're nervous or something, say it. You know, I think it's worth saying, you know, hello, I'm new here, or whatever. If that's how you're feeling, then do say it, because it will remind the person who reads it that that's how you're feeling. And try and build empathy also with the maintainer themselves. Sometimes they might come across as dismissive or cold or aggressive. And I think if you can zoom out and look at some of the other interactions that's been going on, you might be able to tell if actually this person is not so nice, and maybe that's the case. But maybe they're also very overwhelmed as to what is going on, and they're struggling. So if you can try and relate to them as much as possible, I think that will also help. And then my next tip is when I first started contributing to Django, I felt constantly guilty. Because even though I went in, it wasn't, in fact, I never went in with like oh, I have this idea of a feature and I want to get this feature into Django. I wanted to try and be a part of it, and I wanted to try and resolve some things because I like resolving things. So, however, in the experience, I felt like I created more work for other people, because every ticket that I assigned to myself to create a PR, it needs a review. And the depth of review, in my opinion, at Django is really strong. And you can see that this person puts a lot of work in trying to help your contribution to be as best as it can be. And that made me feel awful. Because I was trying to reduce the workload, and in trying to reduce the workload, it looks like you increase the workload that is available, and that it will take some time before you know how to make a contribution that is like of the shape and form of what is wanted. So I'm not sure if that's a good mindset to have, but bear in mind that it does generate, like, even if you're trying to help, you often do create work. So it would be quite a nice idea to think about this and to reflect on how can I make sure that next time this is better. So if they have suggested 3 or 4 things, try and reflect on them, learn about them. Next time you will make sure that those things were done, and build it up so that you build that relationship and trust, and you can like grow from the experience, and hopefully become like a stronger asset to the community, because each individual person, there is like an investment in them, to hoping that they're going to learn and grow and come back. It's okay if they don't, but there is this hope, I guess, that people might also get the bug and want to do more. Which sounded a bit of a downer, but I meant that in a good way. Yeah. Anyways, so that's roughly some elements of people, of how we do things in Django, and a little bit of the theory of things. And I don't have a nice round off of it, other than I'm really excited for the questions and the discussion that we're hopefully going to have. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Sarah. That was fantastic. Well done.
Thank you.
I'm gonna start off our questions. When you started as a contributor to Django, how did you like? What were some of the ways that you humanized yourself with the existing contributors?
Good question. I was so nervous. I think it was very obvious. So I guess there are a few things that I am using my name. You don't have to, and my GitHub profile picture is of my face. Nobody has to do this if they don't want to do this. But those are some subtle clues that this is a person. And I think my very first interaction was like some comment on a track ticket saying, "Hello, is anybody working on this? Because I would love to work on this," and all this kind of stuff. And I tend to, I think I showed a screenshot of Ned's talk, and in his tips, he says use more words around how to like have better interactions. And I'm definitely a person that is quite wordy, hence rambling right now. But I do think that there is an element of if you add in a little bit of the fluff, people can feel what you're trying to portray a bit better and a bit about you as a person. And some fluff is nice. So if it's your communication style, then go for it. Use the fluff, use the emojis, and yeah.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have a question? Mo, I saw you had a hand up. Not sure if you were clapping or trying to ask a question.
Yeah, I had one, but it's far worse than yours. But I was just curious on the point where Sarah said like taking the community's opinion. It's always like been kind of vague to me because not all Django users are Django contributors, but like all the contributors are users. So I'm not sure like how representative like the contributors are of like the bigger user base. So can can taking the community's opinion be biased? Like can like how sure are we like Django is moving to the right direction or stuff like that compared to like the other ecosystem? I was just curious.
Um, can it be biased? Yes. I think it definitely can be. And can we be sure? Probably not. Um, we do have uh, the elections for the steering council, and in some sense, that is one of the ways that we try to show that a larger community, so this is, I think it's DSF members, are able to vote for people that they think represent Django quite well and that they trust to help make some of the technical decisions of Django. And so that is one mechanism that we have to help with this. We don't have a very good mechanism to get much wider feedback. And part of this is, back when I was saying about the structures of different open source projects, we do have a group of passive users, and we don't really know how to get in contact with these users. There are definitely some ways where we have larger audiences than the places where we recommend people get feedback for a feature. Like one of the larger audiences that we have is we do have a annual Django survey, and I would love us to develop this in a way that this gets more constructive feedback on what we should develop in Django. I think that would be great. But it's a really hard challenge And I'm really curious as to what other people, what other frameworks, what other large open source communities are doing. But I know that we try really hard, and a lot of people who are engaged, they care a lot. And yeah, I don't know. No, I wish I knew.
Thank you for the question, Mo. Carlton.
Hi, Sarah, great talk. Thank you. Really nice. I can't remember the exact word you used, so I'll stop trying. You said something about new contributors perhaps finding that their ideas aren't well received, perhaps, because the bottom line is a new contributor turns up and they've got 3 or 4 ideas and they try and change it, and it's like, but we can't just change the API structure of some class deep in Django because that's just not going to fly. And then after a while, there's this sort of training process for new contributors where it's like, well, you have to, why don't you have a discussion first? And, there's this, it's in the FAQ how you request a new feature, but nobody reads the FAQ, right? Nobody goes,
Yeah.
Is there a way you think that we can message better to prospective contributors, kind of the how-to? Like your point was very much like, do some bug fixes first, because you'll get the hang of doing the contributions on things that will definitely be accepted, and then you can perhaps suggest a feature. And that's a much better way from a sort of pedagogical point of view. But how can we communicate that so contributors don't get this kind of upset when when ideas are rejected one after the other at the beginning?
I don't know. What I can tell you is it is definitely a thing that we see is happening. We can see that people get frustrated, especially when they rattle off 3 or 4 ideas in a short period of time, and that they get this resistance with all of them. And the process itself can sometimes be frustrating because it's not a quick process getting the feedback either. And just because you had like an initially positive feedback from 2 people, it doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna fly a bit later. What I can say we are planning to do is we are planning to talk about some of these processes and some of the times where we've noticed there's a pattern of upset and frustration in the community when certain things are happening. And we want to have a discussion with the Code of Conduct Committee and ideally the Steering Council about how can we make this process by design a little bit better, because we're coming across this same friction point with people, and if we can improve that, then it would improve the experience for many people. I don't know whether I would love to be able to say when someone comes and be like, oh, no, but please fix this. It would be great. Maybe they would, who knows? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there was an example this week that came up, and a new contributor, they've opened 2 or 3 PRs without any discussion, and then those PRs haven't been well received, and then they've been sent to the forum, which is the right thing, but from their perspective, they're massively frustrated. It's like, how could we have signposted that? They've obviously read the contributing guide to make a PR. Right? And then it's that, and that happens time and time again. I don't have an answer.
No, we neither.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? All right. Well, thank you, Sarah. We'll turn off the recording here, but really appreciate the talk. It was fantastic, and thank you for everyone else who was asking questions. Until next time.